Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Into the Wild. So, really going on, my interest of this was because I had seen Emil Hirsch go on and talk about this movie and how he really did have to slim down for every bit of this film to the point where, towards the end of the film, he was to actually feel his heart beating out of his chest. And so Chris was getting very worried about his health, and so they decided, okay, let's definitely kind of wrap up these kind of thinner scenes up so we can go on and definitely have Emil be able to definitely get his health back, and so on and so forth, and feel that he's okay with with what we're doing. But I just thought that was such a fascinating thing. I went on to Michael Rosenbaum's Inside of You, and Emil Hirsch was on there, and he was talking about uh, this movie, and he also went on and talked about Lone Survivor and all those other movies that he did at some point. But yeah, but going on into this film, for me, easily just thoroughly enjoy survival movies that there isn't some goofy element in it where it's oh well, there's this monster that shows up XYZ minutes into the film, and I'm no, you should just have a survival movie be simply a survival movie. You shouldn't add anything to it, any goofy elements and whatever. There are some times when eventually we had the James Franco film 127 Hours or something like that, where he goes on and he starts to hallucinate and stuff like that, and those movies are kind of interesting, where we go on and have certain stories where people are to somehow think that they are to be losing it so badly that they think that they have been rescued, and we're just oh yeah, this guy's getting rescued, and then all of a sudden come to find out it's just this guy being into this place for so long, kind of like the Ryan Reynolds movie Buried. So going into this story, we have an adventure here where it kind of goes all over the place, and we show where Chris or Alex, because we have it where Chris is to change his name to Alexander Supertramp, and so, but I'll probably call him Alex for most of this movie because that's what he decided to call himself. So Alex is to go on here and do this whole road trip where he's all over the world. He's to have this big massive adventure where he is to make his way seemingly to California, New Mexico, and eventually is going to make his way back, or is to make his way to Alaska to see all of these places, to see California, and just go on this big massive road trip adventure, because not all of it is from the road. Some of it is just kayaking. And so I just thought that this movie was so refreshing, and I kind of I just find it interesting to have a movie where someone just decides to just completely get off the grid and is to just survival is the only element of the film. And that's when I can just enjoy movies like Zac Efron's Gold, or I can enjoy Tom Hanks' Castaway, or I can just enjoy those kind of movies, even though it, for a lot of people, may be boring, because I just enjoy these kind of films. So this movie is enjoyable. It's not a boring piece because it kind of, you get to meet a bunch of characters along the way. You, of course, have Alex at some point going on and meeting Vince Vaughn's character Wayne, who is to be uh, this kind of farmer of sorts, or kind of grain farmer of sorts. And we also, at some point, are to have Alex continue to bump into this couple called Jan and Rainey. And it seems more and more every single time that Alex is to eventually meet these people, it seems that every single one of them don't want to just let him go off on this adventure. They just like, well, hey, like, how about you just stay with us a little bit longer? How about we go on and like we'll like adopt you? Let's and so that's the interesting thing about this journey is like I think there's a lot of people who are really just truly concerned that Alex may go on into the wild and never come back. So, not only that, but then we have this story about Chris's sister, Karen, who is to kind of tell us from like her family's perspective, like what had they been doing for that long stretch of time where Chris was gone, and how Chris's parents really and truly were, both Billy and both Walt. And so, yeah, I just thought that this was really fascinating, this whole story. And, like, coming to find out, like, what you, like, are to really understand maybe why Chris was to go onto this journey, uh, and hopefully, like, feel very free and very, um, I don't know, like spiritually enlightened. I don't know. Like you could say a number of things for Chris when he was to go on and go through this journey. So, with that said, it's just an adventure movie. Like we meet a bunch of people along the road, as of course Chris is just thumbing it on his way to just go all around the world to see every bit of everything. And yeah, so as well as us like consistently bumping into this story, a number of people that of course seem to be very free and careless to the point of them not even wearing clothes. um so yeah, like that is an interesting part of this movie also. um just to have somebody who like is just like the chest is just flopping in the wind. And like I would just be like, man, I can't, I wouldn't be able to concentrate if like if we had a woman that was just so carefree. um but yeah, but like especially if you have like a girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, then it probably wouldn't matter, but still it would just be like so distracting, especially if I were in Chris's shoes. But anyways, with that said, let's just go into that double five time territory. I will admit for this review, when I go into more specifics about the movie, I'm going to be all over the place because really, this movie is kind of all over the place. So I'm going to try to stay in a certain kind of way of things. But like, there's a lot of like compact stuff going on besides this adventure. So with that said, I hope I'm going to be able to get everything done and out of the way, as we say. So let's go into that double five. Let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the difficulty with spoil this movie. So it's kind of really goofy to figure out where to go on it and talk about this because I could go on and like I could explain like from Chris being with Billy and Walt and Karen, and like never actually go into the Alaska stuff until he actually gets there, because that would probably make a whole lot of sense. because they could do it in the perfect way of which that is to not be like the film, and because we have like the Alaska stuff, and then it jumps around to a number of other events because the main goal is for Chris to get to Alaska. So I think what I'll just do is I'll go on and I'll do it like how I was thinking about doing it, of just like the teeing up of like Chris getting through this adventure to make it to Alaska. I think is what I'll do. So it'll probably be much easier. So let's go on. So in the beginning of this, we have Chris, who is to graduate college. He is to have a degree. And so Chris, of course, is to graduate. And it seems that since he is to graduate, it seems that both Billy and Walt are at this diner with Chris wanting to go on and buy him a new car. And Chris is, of course, telling like Billy and Walt, it's like, well, hey, like my car is completely fine. Like my car is great. It runs fine. And they're like, well, yeah, but you could get a better car. And he's like, no, like this car is fine. It's just a thing. So, and we also had Karen, who had just a permit, who was driving the car, and Walt was saying like, hey, Karen, you shouldn't be driving this car. And Karen was like, well, I just thought it was another licensed person, and then I can go on it. And so it's a whole thing. So it seems that Chris is to go on and he has to have $24,000 and some change and stuff in his bank account. And he is to go on and realize that because he was to go to the bank yesterday to go on and check this out. So we all of a sudden have like this whole Atlanta Braves like fans coming in and shouting and like, yeah, the Braves, yeah. And like Walt and Billy are just like, really? Are they going to be shouting the whole time and whatever? So like we also have Billy that's going on and just boasting about her son Chris, who had just graduated from college, as if like it matters to anybody. But again, it's always like a parent for you, where it's like, hey, boasting about their kid when like it doesn't even make sense to like add it into this discussion. Or there's a lot of times where like someone will be boasting about something that again has nothing to do with the conversation, but it's always like, oh, you're that person that has to go on and just add something in, even though it makes no sense to what's going on in the conversation. And I know that kind of person that would go on and do that. Me, no. Anyways, so Chris goes on, and so he decides to go and take this 24,000, and he like it seems like there's certain amounts of money that he does keep, but then the rest of the money he donates to charity. And so he's not going further to college or anything like that. But it's kind of weird because we have Chris who goes through this journey, and at certain points he does need money to consistently fund his trip to go to Alaska. And he technically had the money to do this, but like he goes on and at some points he works at Wayne's grain farm, or he goes and flips burgers or whatever at a Burger King. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, this guy had like $24,000, but this kid is to say, it's like, well, if I were to keep that money, it would have made me cautious to maybe decide to turn back quicker if I had that money. So we go on into this story, and so Chris seemed to have been in a home where both Walt and Billy would eventually go on and consistently like fight with one another, argue with one another, to the point to where they would want to have gotten a divorce, but it just never happened for some reason. It seems that Walt was to go on and do something for NASA, and it seems that he was a genius of some sort. And it seems that Walt and Billy went on to make a business with one another. And so I guess they decided, because they're in business with one another, that they didn't decide to go on and do this whole divorce thing. But more and more, they still argue, and more we have Karen, or we have Chris, who was honestly just hoping for the divorce because of them just being so difficult. So, and I'm just like, that's how the movie seemed to me. So, and that's what they say in the film. So I'm hopefully not putting any words in anyone's mouth. So Chris goes on, and I think Chris's possible journey of wanting to go and do this whole trip to Alaska was simply to detach himself from a life where he might have not have chosen, like, how he was to live his life. So, because it already seemed like his parents were to decide, like, well, hey, like we want to give you a better car, we want to do this for you, we want to do, and Chris is just like, no, like, I just like like everything that I have is already fine. So Chris goes on and is to just run away one day. He is to decide to take his car and drive it as far as he can. And it seems that when he was a child, he went on and just was to decide to leave his house one night and just start walking somewhere. And he ended up in one of his neighbor's houses in a candy drawer. And it's like, oh, okay, so I guess somebody was to discover him. So Chris was to go on and abandon his car. And so, because I guess both his parents were to decide to eventually go and have a private investigator try to track Chris down, or his parents eventually filed a missing persons report, which of course led them to track down this car. And so Karen was to go on and say that, I guess, like, Chris, one way or another, just didn't want to be found, which was, like, of course, it was true. Because at some point, Chris was to say that he was to be at this certain apartment, and both Billy and Walt were to go to that actual apartment to find out that Chris hadn't been there in a number of XYZ days. So they start trying to figure out how they can figure out where Chris is, but Chris further and further just continues to go on and is to get rid of things that he had before so he can go on and eventually just disappear. So Chris, of course, is to go on and is to continue to just hitchhike his way uh, to any part of the United States. And so the first people he goes on and meets are Rainey and Jan, and they go on to have, of course, Chris live with them for a brief amount of time. And so like both of them have tents, they're camping along, and so Rainey and Jan, I guess when they have Alex who is now here, it seems like they're talking about their past, because I guess Alex is bringing up some old wounds of theirs, because I guess they had lost a son before. And so it seems that Jan and Rainey are to be huffing it, just like, of course, Alex is, but they're going through this RV and they're vacationing and they're whatever, and they are, I guess, to really just be called hippies, I guess. We have them going on and like selling books and stuff like that to continue to afford their adventure. So Chris is to go on and hang with Rainey and hang with Jan, and at one point we have Chris who has a number of these pieces of wood, and he is to make a deal with Rainey, like, hey, if I go on and I swim in this water and I don't like water, like I'll go on and do that, and you can go and carry these pieces of wood. And Rainey's like, sure, like okay, like deliver, like consider them taken. So Chris goes on and is to go in the water with Jan, and eventually once they get out, Rainey and Jan are eventually, it seems that they're rekindling the relationship all over again. That it seems both Rainey and Jan are to go in their tent and to reconsummate their love between one another. I'm saying that very vaguely for a reason. So we have Alex that is just to go on to read a book, and then the very next morning we have Alex who leaves a note that is to say thank you, Rainey and Jan, as he leaves. Because again, we have, I think, Alex consistently wants to try to disappear from these people because he doesn't want to like stay too attached to people, and he probably doesn't also like to say goodbye either. So we also had one moment where we had Alex, who was to have this kind of very straw hat, and Jan was to make this joke of like, man, you have an awful hat. He just found it somewhere in the forest somewhere, and he just put it on. And so Jan is to say, it's like, well, hey, I'm gonna make you like a better hat. And so at some point she ends up making him like a ski cap. And so when she sees him for the second time, because they re-meet again, she tosses him this ski cap for him to wear. So Chris, or I'm so wanting to either say Chris or Alex here, because Alexander is the name that Chris decides for himself. Alexander Supertramp, and he goes on and he writes it via this lipstick on this mirror to say that this is going to be his name that he chose for himself instead of having his parents chose for him. He gets to the point where he burns his social security card. He cuts up any cards that he used to have in his wallet. And so Chris goes on to continue his journey. And so Chris continues his journey to eventually make it to some grain farm with a guy named Wayne. And so Wayne's played by Vince Vaughn, and so at this point, Alexander doesn't really have much of a real plan of what he's going to do, but he just wants to be out in the wilderness. And so he doesn't really have like a real thought. He just wants to go on and do this. So we have Wayne, of course, that is to mention to Alexander. It's like, well, hey, man, like, if you want to go on and you want to know anything, talk to Kevin, who's actually Zach Galifianakis. So we have Kevin who's talking to Alexander and talking to him about like how he should like go on and cook this meat and what he should have with him if he wants to go out in the wilderness to survive. And so it seems that Alexander has thought things through or thought things out, and that it seems that uh, Alexander is to also go and find certain books that are to help him do these survival skills, like what are certain plants that you can eat to survive, like what are to be kind of healthy berries and things like that that eventually will um, help you survive in the wilderness. So we have Chris that goes on, and come to find out, uh, Wayne is consistently keep paying Alexander and giving him checks, and come to find out, it seems that Wayne is to have gone and done something uh, that is to be illegal, and him get arrested. And so Wayne is shouting to the guys, is like, well, hey, it seems like we're gonna have to shut down the farm for a little while, and hey, like, Alexander, like it was nice meeting with you. Like, you can come back here anytime, and a job will always be open for you. Knowing good and well, because Wayne was to go to this bar and was to talk about Alexander, like, hey, what do you want to do? Like, and so that's when, of course, uh, Alexander is going to have this plan about going to Alaska. And he's like, well, like, what do you mean? Like, do you mean like the city Alaska? Or do you mean like Alaska, Alaska? And he's like, Alaska, Alaska. So, so we go on, and so Chris is to go to this like park ranger, one part of this story, and he's to ask him about like kayaking, because at some point Chris was to buy all these like items, all of these like survival items, and so he goes to this one like forest ranger or something like that, and is to go on and ask him. It's like, well, hey, like, when can I go on and be able to like swim in these like rafters? And the guy is like, well, you have to go on and you have to be on a waiting list, and once you can go on and in a year you can come on here and you can do this. And Alexander's like, wait a minute, so I have to be on a waiting list for a year to just, excuse me, kayak in these raptors? And the guy's like, well, yeah, there's a waiting list. And so we just go on, and so Alexander's like, well, that, like, since there's nobody here, like, I'm just gonna go on and do this anyways. So Alexander just goes on and decides to just go through these raptors, and he has no helmet, as we have one guy who's shouting, hey man, helmet, because this guy's probably gonna get like smacked all around all over the place. So he has a life vest, he has a canoe, and so he's just kind of just doing these rafters, and he's just trying to make it through. So and so also like Alexander was to also need a permit to be able to do this. And so yeah, like I can see how at some point he's just gonna get arrested. But so Alex is to go on and meet with these two Danish people. And so we have a guy named Mads, and we have girl named Sonia. Sonia, who seems to have been uh, kind of swimming in this water, and immediately is to take off her tank top, and she has nothing underneath. So we just have like consistently Alexander in the Raptors here, and Mads and Sonya are like, "Hey man, come over here. We have hot dogs. Do you like a hot dog?" And so we go on, and we have Alexander who's talking to Mads and Sonya, and they're talking about possibly like all the stuff that they're gonna go and do. They're gonna possibly go to Las Vegas and just kind of like see what comes out of that. And so Mads is also telling Chris that if he goes on the way he's going, he could possibly swim all the way to Mexico if that's what he really wanted to do. So Alexander is to think that that's a really great idea. And so we have Alexander that goes on, and he is to somehow sneak underneath the border to Mexico just to see if he can do it. And he does. And at some point, we have this kind of border patrol that is to find out what Chris had done. And so it seems that they were going to go on and eventually get rid of Alexander, but then Alexander goes on and is to jump on this train and try to make his way to California. So, and then once Alexander continues to jump on this train, we have one moment where Alexander is getting beaten up by this one guy who is to have stopped this train and pulled him out of this train and start beating the crap out of him. And he's like, "Hey man, like I'll remember your face, like you're taking away all the liberties and everything like that from it, all kinds of other people. So, like yeah, like you've gone on and you've like just taken advantage of this, so you aren't going to be doing that anymore." So Alexander goes on and is to make his way to California, where I believe he again bumps into both Jan and Rainey, because he is to be at this kind of camp out place, and it seems that they are to do these kind of musician uh, kind of things where we have like Insane Kane or something like that performing, and then we also have Tracy Tracy Tatro, who is to go on and be this girl who's to say it's like, well, I'm 18, and then she ends up saying that she's 16, because Tracy is really interested in Alexander, and the more and more that they both hang out with one another, and Rainey is just like, yeah, like it's like if you aren't going to go over there and start talking to this girl. So come to find out, like, Tracy is just kind of interested in being with Alexander, but Alexander's like, well, how old are you? And Tracy finally admits that she's 16, and he's like, yeah, no. Like, just no. Like, it was nice, but no. Like, you're just too young for me. So we still have Rainey and Jan who are wanting to just hang on to Alexander here, but he's just like, no. Like, I'm still on the way to making it to Alaska. Like, it's still his journey. So at one point we go on and have at some point where Chris is again to be dropped off here. And so we have Chris who is just kind of thumbing his way to where his next place is. And we have Chris who bumps into a guy named Ron. And this is after Chris has gone on to be tempted to almost make his way back home, almost to try and get a train ticket back home, almost deciding to give up. And then he decides, no, like, I've gone this far, like, how about I just go a little bit more? So Ron is to go on and see Chris is like, well, hey, Sonny, like, where are you going to? And we, of course, have Chris that mentions it's like, well, like, the oh my god, it's hot springs. And so Ron's like, well, I've never heard of that place, but you just kind of point me to that direction. So Ron and Chris go to this location where there's like this nude beach. And so uh, Alexander is to consistently camp there. And Ron is like, hey, aren't you worried that these people are like going to take something from you? And Chris is just like, well, no. Um, we also had at one point where Chris was going and working at a Burger King to try to afford his Alaskan road trip. And so when he was working at Burger King, we had the one girl who was talking to Chris and like, you know what? Like, I really want to keep you on here so you can afford your road trip. But like, Chris, you got to wear socks. You got to wear socks under your shoes. And I'm like, why is it that, like, really when thinking about it, like, there's probably a number of people that probably are homeless and they can't really afford stuff. Um, but I don't think like socks is like a thing that everyone is really going to notice. But I guess this girl did, bizarrely. So, and I didn't like, I wouldn't think that like wearing socks would be like a health code violation thing, but I don't know, maybe that's just me. So, Ron and Chris. So we have at one point where Chris is to go on and want to show Ron like this thing of water, and Ron just can't make it up that kind of high incline. So we have it where Chris is just like, well, if you would go up here, then like he explains it. So Ron then goes on and is to take Chris and like show uh like uh like what he does. And I guess he does stuff with leather. And so Ron goes on and is to talk about his past and I guess how he possibly lost his wife, his son, and eventually was to be an alcoholic, and then turned around and was to find God, I guess, and was to go to church and everything like that. So both Ron and Chris are having a really fun adventure together, and at some point Ron does go on to that height that he said he couldn't before, to look on with Chris, and like they had a bunch of adventures of them just kind of going and seeing these sights. And Ron was to like say, it's like, well, you know what, Chris, like I know that you might have some difficulties with your family, and you might even have difficulties with religion and stuff like that, but like really he's just kind of saying that at some points like God can make a beautiful sight like this kind of thing. So we have this whole time that Billy and Walt are trying to hope that at some point that their son is going to come back. Billy at some point is just kind of going through, and every time she drives anywhere, she used to see this kind of guy just kind of walking around thinking that it's her son. And Walt at some point is just kind of looking at some part of the road, and he's just falls over and just so um like I don't know what any of this means, but like we just have these kind of moments where we just have these characters that are just kind of like, why hasn't he come back? To where they just assume that he's going to come back. And also we have Karen, who at some point was to give Billy and Walt a number of letters that they had sent to Chris, and they were all returned. So we go on into this story, and so Alexander is with Ron, and we have another moment where Alexander is trying to sneak away from Ron, and again, I think Alexander just has a problem with saying goodbye. Or also just, again, wanting to sneak away before someone is to want to, like, adopt him like Ron wants to, which I thought was so nice. Yeah, because we had it where Chris, or Alexander, we have Alexander who is to try to leave, and Ron is like, well, hey, like, I guess you're not up to just, like, have breakfast, are you? And Chris is just like, yeah, you caught me. So Ron is like, well, hey, like, if I didn't have to go to church today, I would drive you all the way to Alaska if I could. Um, but that's just like that's just not the way um, he can do things. So we go on and we have Ron who can drive Chris as far as he can, and then before Alexandra leaves, Ron says like, "Well, hey, like, you know what? Like, considering I don't really have any family or much of anything, and when I die, like, no one is going to be able to like take up um my things. So like maybe I can go on and just adopt you, and you can just live with me, and like wouldn't that be great?" So Alexander's like, "Well, yeah, that does sound really nice, but like can we go on and like table this discussion until I come back from my trip?" And Ron is like, "Okay, that sounds nice." So Alexander goes on and leaves, and Ron cries, and then like Alexander leaves to go on to his trip. So we have it where Alexander is now in Alaska. So at one point he's making it just through the wilderness, and the ski cap that of course Jan was to give him, he tosses it onto some tree, I guess, to kind of maybe have a certain thing of like, okay, if I'm ever going to go on and make my way back here, then I can just use the ski cap as a way to just figure out where I'm supposed to go. So Chris continues to go on through this wilderness and is to go into this little batch of water where then he has to take off his pants, and he's pantsless, and he's now like trying to find some little animal to kill so he can have something to eat. So we have Alexander that is to continue on this path of like camping and whatever. But then all of a sudden he ends up finding this bus, this Fairbanks City Transit System bus. So he then decides to use this bus as this kind of like shelter like thing. And then when he goes into the actual bus, it seems like this whole bus is to be this like this really just home inside of a bus, like as if someone had gone on and perfectly like orchestrated this bus for someone to just live in. And so there was like a mattress in there, there's a furnace in there, there's a number of items that anybody can go on and use in, and like there was forks and spoons and all kinds of things all in this bus. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here. So Alexander goes on and is eventually just kind of shooting down things of food, and is at some point to figure out how this furnace works, is to melt ice with this furnace and be able to just make water. And so when it seems that he's running out of food, he just uses like rice as a thing to eat. And then it gets down to the point where like he really is like starting to run out of rice, where he makes this kind of line in the rice bag to just say like caution, like this is I guess where it's the most dangerous. So Chris goes on and at some point is to realize that Chris might have gotten to every single animal he possibly can, to where he's just like, where's the food? I'm hungry. And so he's shouting like a wild man. And yeah, of course, like eventually when you can't like easily find food, or like all of your food source has been killed or whatever, then like where are you going to go for food? It just doesn't magically appear. So at one point we go on, and the only animal that Chris can really find here is this big massive moose animal, but he doesn't know how to take care of a big massive animal like that. And so Chris all of a sudden is to need to quickly like strategize for a big animal like this, and come to find out Chris is to go on and like learn from Kevin, when Kevin is to say if you have this any like big massive game like this, if bugs or anything are to get into it, you're basically effed. So Chris goes on and is trying to quickly try to dissect this animal, and while he goes on and does that, he needs to figure out a way to, it feels like he like wasn't really like planning for a big animal like this, so he never like prepped anything for a big animal like this. So he had to not only like prepare how to cook it at the same time that he was also cutting it. So there was a lot of time taken up um, from having to both like dissect this thing and then to like put everything together to cook it, which that was like, I wish like Chris could have been able to go on and like drag this thing all the way to the bus and be able to have just kind of within the bus like quickly could have figured out some kind of storage or something. Like if he would have had some like cooler or something like that, like he would have been able to possibly have stored some of this stuff. But again, that would be like asking a lot, uh, even for this story. So we go on, and so Chris eventually used to notice that bugs are starting to get to this meat, and so he just realizes, God, this is just a waste. And Chris is to see like how well his items are getting cooked, and like nothing is turning out the way he wanted it to. So he's like, God, like I'm gonna die out here, simply because I just don't have enough food left. And everything is just these big, massive things that I just can't go on and justify making food out of. So, plus, also, I don't really understand why, like, Alexander had to have a gun. I honestly would have imagined that Alexander would have had some kind of weapon that you can consistently reuse, like bows and arrows sometimes might work as a reusable thing. Um, but what do I know? Um, Considering I've just been watching like Walking Dead and stuff like that, where like it seems that a crossbow or something like that would be a reusable thing. But anyways, so we go into this story, and Chris is just slowly but surely just starving. He's starving himself to the point of we see him at his like thinnest, uh, and so I guess Alexander no longer, because he's just not eating, he's starving himself. He at some point no longer has the energy to really do much of anything to try and hunt after his food. It's kind of like cavemen, like not to like really besmirch Alexander here, but yeah, like when you have like a caveman who is so thin and just like has to always hunt for his food, like it gets tiring, like having to hunt for his own food every single day, and to not be able to have a extra surplus of food while you're also getting food. So like we never have Alexander who is to have like spare food lying around. And like eventually when you go on and you play a lot of survival games, you go on and you just have all this spare stuff lying around. Like you would have thought that maybe Chris at some point would have maybe like stocked up on like canned goods or something, like motherfucker, especially whenever he was to have those jobs. And I don't know, like we probably have it where like a lot of this stuff he was probably having to think of for that day instead of like thinking for the following days or the following whatever. So like that's just the sad thing about this story is like we just have a number of survival situations where you kind of have to think about that day instead of thinking about a week from now or a month from now or a year from now how to continue to survive. So but it did seem like this character could have eventually like figured things out because he had like he's very well read and very well educated, and so I don't know. So yeah, so unfortunately we had Chris at the very end of this story who ended up starving and at some point was to die out in this bus. And like that's the last we see him is to like breathe his last breath, and he dies. And so I was kind of curious if that story was legitimately true, where he does die in the end. And surefire enough, he did from starvation. And because this is based on a true story, it would be kind of odd if the guy survived. And but still, so yeah, like just a really like fascinating adventure film, and I enjoyed it. But then it was also just like, man, I wish like things could have really worked out. I wish that like this story could have really worked out for for Alexander, and he could have realized, like, well, hey, like, I think I'm finally done with this adventure. And I just want to go back to whoever. Cause it seemed like he always was to have people like welcome him with open arms. So he really could have gone on, and Alexander could have left this place if it wasn't working out. He could have left to go back with Ron. He could have left to go back with Wayne. He could have left to go back with possibly Tracy or any number of the people, Rainey and Jane, eventually any of these people that he would have met along the way, and they would have taken care of him. And so, yeah, like towards the end of the movie, we see all the people that at some point had taken care of Alex or just kind of been with him on this journey. And so that was kind of an interesting conclusion. We had like Mads and Sonia that were possibly doing well in Las Vegas. So like showing them uh, with that. So with that said, I think that's all that I want to go on and talk about in this movie. Very long piece of a film, but and plus also I wanted to have done this in a certain specific way. So with that said, let me know in the comments below if I forgot about anything, because I'm sure there's a million things that I did. Uh, Really, I'm sure there was a little bit more detail that I could have went into, but nah. Because plus also looking at it, like this is an entire guy's life story in one movie. So there is a lot of details that probably had been missed by me, or really, there could have been a lot of interesting things gone on to this story. And I'm kind of curious if there ever was any little things where after this movie was to come out and someone would say, hey, I knew that guy. And they could have had their own little like addition to this movie and whatever. But like, there's only so much stuff you can go on and find about this whole journey of this character. So, with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, buddy. Bye, buddy. So, after the fact, always every once in a while happens. The one thing that I forgot about, there was a moment where Chris was to have that like apple, and he was like eating the apple, and he's like, like this is the best apple I've ever had, the apple of my eye. And then, like he was looking like right in the camera, he's like, and so they cut there. Like I wonder if that was like improvised or was it planned or like were they just kind of having fun with this whole scene? Even to the point where like Chris looked directly in the camera, was like, So, and we also had the moment where both Chris and Tracy were going to that weird, goofy looking when they were in California, that big, huge mountain thing, where we had the guy who was to go on and had been like at this place for a number of years and was to have like this elderly man who was talking about love and like how a number of people at some point had gone on to help this guy out, and we have it to where Chris goes on and asks this guy, it's like, well, like, do you really believe in love, and do you really believe in all this stuff that you're saying? And he's like, yeah, like I definitely do. And like we have this like mountain that has all these like things about love and so on and so forth, and so like really a very beautiful and like interesting piece where they're going through, and like there was these kind of like these doors they were to make up a part of this like mountain, and guy goes on and just is to spout about love. Very interesting. um Other than that, I think everything else is technically covered. uh yeah, I think that's it. It's always one of those like, oh yeah, I forgot about these things, and then like it's the quick thing. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything else that I did forget about, because I'm sure there's a billion other things that I probably did. Uh, Other than that, yeah, I think most of this movie was covered, and so that's where I can eventually be satisfied about it and just go on and just leave it as it is. So let me know in the comments below. Any extra little tidbits about this movie? I thoroughly enjoy any little bit of information about this film or about the guy or any little other things. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.